Preface to the 4th edition, where that nature whose self-help in diseases is believed by physicians of the traditional school to be the incomparable healing art, a close imitation of which should be the physician's highest aim, the great nature herself, that is, the voice of ineffable wisdom of the great artificer of the infinite universe. We should then feel constrained to be guided by this infallible voice, though we might be puzzled to understand why we physicians, with our artificial interference by medicines, disturb or injuriously aggravate these presumably incomparable operations of nature's self-help in diseases with medicatrix. But this is far from being the case. That nature whose self-help was alleged by the traditional school of medicine to become incomparable healing art, and the only thing worth imitating is merely the individual nature of the organic man, is nothing but the instinctive, irrational, unreasoning vital force subject to the organic laws of our body, which is ordained by the Creator to maintain the functions and the sensations of the organism in marvelously perfect condition, so long as the man continues in good health, but was not intended or adapted for the restoration of the best manner of deranged or lost health. For should our vital force have its integrity impaired by injurious influences from without, then this force strives instinctively and automatically to free itself from the adventitious derangement, disease, by revolutionary processes. But these very efforts are themselves diseases. They are a second different malady substituted for the original one. The vital force, I say, produces in accordance with the laws of constitution of the organism, to which it is subject, a disease or of a different sort, intended to expel the disease by which it was attacked, which it strives to accomplish by pain, metastasis, and so forth. So pain is kind of a reaction of the vital force to the actual disease, but mainly by evacuation and the sacrifice of much of the fluid and solid constituents of the body, with difficult, often dubious, injurious, frequently when disastrous results. Were it not that men in all ages were aware of these imperfection and not infrequent inadequacy of these blind efforts of the instinctive, unreasoning vital force in its attempts at self-help in diseases, they would not have longed so much nor zealously striven to assist the suffering of the vital force, so powerless to help itself inefficiently by the employment of better remedial means, in order to terminate the morbid process in a more speedy and sure manner, thereby restoring the wished for health as speedily as possible. In a word, they would not have exerted themselves to discover a healing art. But as what has hitherto been termed healing art was a mere imperfect imitation of those unhelpful, useless, not infrequently injurious efforts and operations of the instinctive, unreasoning vital force, misnamed nature, when left to itself in disease, it will, I think, be conceded that before me the true healing art was not discovered, but that homeopathy is this healing art, which had hitherto been sought for in vain. Its fundamental principles teach, its performances prove. Cothin, January 20, 1829, Samuel Hahnemann. Preface to the 5th edition. In order to give a general notion of the treatment of diseases pursued by the old school of medicine, allopathy, I may observe that it presupposes the existence of sometimes of excess of blood, plethora which is never present, sometimes of morbid matters and acridities. Hence it entraps off the life's blood and exerts itself either to clear away the imaginary disease matter or to conduct it elsewhere. by emetics, purgatives, sialogs, diuretics, drawing plasters, cetons, etc. In the vain belief that the disease will thereby be weakened and materially eradicated, in place of which the patient's sufferings are thereby increased. And by such and other painful appliances, the forces and nutritious juices indispensable to the curative process are abstracted from the organism. It assails the body with large doses of powerful medicines, often repeated to rapid succession for a long time, whose long enduring, not infrequently frightful effects it knows not, and which it would almost seem makes unrecognizable by the commingling of several such unknown substances in one prescription. And by their long continued employment, it develops in the body new and often ineradicable medicinal diseases. Whenever it can, it employs in order to keep in favor with its patient. Remedies that immediately suppress and hide the morbid symptoms by opposition, contraria contraris, for short time palliatives, but that leave the disposition to these symptoms, the disease itself strengthened and aggravated. It considers affections on the exterior of the body as purely local as and existing there independently, and vainly supposes that it has cured them when it has driven them away by means of external remedies, so that the internal affection is thereby compelled to break out on a nobler and more important part. When it knows not what else to do for the disease, which will not yield or which grows worse, the old school of medicine undertakes to change it into something else. It knows not what, by means of an alternative, for example, by life undermining calomel, corrosive sublimate, and mercurial preparations in large doses. To render through ignorance, if not fatal, at all events incurable, the vast majority, 99 above 100 of all diseases, namely those of chronic character, by continually weakening and tormenting the debilitated patient, already suffering without that from his disease, and adding new destructive drug. So whenever that immediately suppress, so whenever it can, it employs in order to keep in favor with its patient. The footnote for that is, for the same object, the experienced allopath delights to invent a fixed name, by preference a Greek one, for the malady, in order to make the patient believe that he has long known this disease as an old acquaintance, and hence is the fittest person to cure it. So basically, to render through ignorance, if not fatal, at all events incurable, the vast majority, 99 out of 100 of all diseases, namely of those of a chronic character, by continually weakening and tormenting the debilitated patient, already suffering without that from his disease, and adding new destructive drug disease. This clearly seems to be the unhallowed main business of the old school of medicine, allopathy, and a very easy business it is when once one has become as adept in this pernicious practice and is sufficiently insensible to the stings of conscience. And yet, for all these mischievous operations, the ordinary physician of the old school can assign his reasons, which however rest only on foregone conclusions of his book and teachers, and on the authority of this or that distinguished physician of the old school. Even the most opposite and the most senseless modes of treatment find their defense in their authority. Let their disastrous effects speak ever so loudly against them, it is only under the old physician, who has been at least gradually convinced after so many years of misdeeds of the mischievous nature of his so-called art, and who no longer treats even the severest diseases with anything stronger than plantain water mixed with strawberry syrup, that the smallest number are injured and die. The non-healing art, which for many centuries has been firmly established in full possession of the power to dispose of the life and death of patients according to its own good will and pleasure, and in that period has shortened the lives of 10 times as many human beings as most destructive wars, and rendered many millions of patients more diseased and wretched than they originally were. This allopathy. I shall first expose somewhat more minutely before teaching in detail its exact opposite, at the newly discovered tree healing art. As regards the latter, homeopathy, it is quite otherwise. It can easily convince every reflecting person that the diseases of men are not caused by any substance, any accredity, that is to say, any disease matter, but that they are solely spirit-like, dynamic derangements of the spirit-like power, the vital force, that animates the human body. Homeopathy knows that a cure can only take place by the reaction of the vital force against the rightly chosen remedy that has been ingested, and that the cure will be certain and rapid in proportion to the strength with which the vital force still prevails in the patient. Hence, homeopathy avoids everything in the slightest degree enfeebling. Footnote is, homeopathy sheds not a drop of blood, administers no emetics, no purgatives, laxatives, or diaphoretics, drives off not external affection by external means, prescribes no warm baths or medicated clusters, applies no Spanish flies or mustard plasters, no cetons, no issues, excites no tylism, burns not with moxa or red hot iron to the very bone, and so forth, but gives its own hand in its own preparations of simple, uncompounded medicines, which it is accurately acquainted with, never subdues pain by opium, etc. Hence, homeopathy avoids everything in the slightest degree, enfeebling as much as possible every excitation of pain, for pain also diminishes the strength. Hence, it employs for cure only those medicines whose effects in altering and deranging dynamically the health. It knows accurately, and from these it selects one whose pathogenetic power, its medicinal disease, is capable of removing the natural disease in question by similarity, similia similibus, and this administers to the patient in simple form, but in rare and minute doses, so small that without occasioning pain or weakening, they just suffice to remove the natural malady by means of the reacting energy of the vital force, and with this result that without weakening and injuring or torturing him in the very least, natural disease is extinguished, and the patient, even whilst he is getting better, gains his strength and thus is cured. Apparently easy, but actually troublesome and difficult business, and one requiring much thought, but which restores the patient without suffering in short time to perfect health, and thus it is a salutary and blessed business. Thus, homeopathy is perfectly simple system of medicine, remaining always fixed in its principles as in its practice, which, like doctrine whereon it is based, if rightly apprehended, it will be found so exclusive and only in that way serviceable, that as the doctrine must be accepted in its purity, so it must be purely practiced and all backward staying. I am therefore sorry that I once gave the advice of savoring allopathy to apply to the back in psoriatic disease, a resinous plaster to cause itching, and to employ the finest electrical sparkle in paralytic affections. For as both these appliances have seldom proved of service, and have furnished the mongrel homeopathist with an excuse for their allopathic transgressions. I am grieved I should ever have proposed them, and I hereby solemnly retract them. For this person also, that since then our homeopathic system has advanced so near perfection that they are no longer required. To the pernicious routine of old school, whose opposite it is as day to night, is totally inadmissible, otherwise it ceases to deserve its honorable name of homeopathy. Cothin, March 28, 1833, by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann.